This is Federalist 31, Part 2. In disquisitions of every kind, there are certain primary truths, or first principles, upon which all subsequent reasonings must depend. These contain an internal evidence which, antecedent to all reflection or combination, commands an assent of the mind. Where it produces not this effect, it must proceed either from some disorder in the organs of perception, or from the influence of some strong interest, or passion, or prejudice. Of this nature are the maxims in geometry that the whole is greater than its parts, that things equal to the same are equal to one another, that two straight lines cannot enclose a space, and that all right angles are equal to each other. Of the same nature are these other maxims in ethics and politics, that there cannot be an effect without a cause, that the means ought to be proportioned to the end, that every power ought to be commensurate with its object, that there ought to be no limitation of power destined to effect a purpose which is itself incapable of limitation. And there are other truths in the two latter sciences which, if they cannot pretend to rank in the class of axioms, are yet such direct inferences from them, and so obvious in themselves, and so agreeable to the natural and unsophisticated dictates of common sense, that they challenge the assent of a sound and unbiased mind with a degree of force and conviction almost equally irresistible. Notice in the first part of this Federalist, I use the word maxim. I put it on the board, and I introduce you to some books. Here, not that he's getting too philosophical, he's just saying that simply some things are as simply straightforward as the things maxims in geometry. Some of the rules that we know it applies anywhere, anytime, and there is no arguing with it. He says, in ethics and politics, the same thing applies. There are certain things that are as clear as day, and nobody should argue with it. Like when you give responsibilities to a government, for the government to able to actually fulfill those responsibilities, take care of the responsibilities you have given it, you have to give it enough of resources, enough of authority to get the job done. And here he is again referring to the people who are against the idea of taxation by the federal government, taxation of the individual citizens of the U.S. Because these anti-federalists are writing articles criticizing this Constitution, saying that the states themselves, the 13 states, should be able to tax the individual citizens, not the federal government. The federal government should only tax the imports. And he says, Hamilton says, we don't know what kind of emergencies are going to come up. We talked about it in Federalist 30. If an emergency comes up and the only way for the government to make revenues is from taxation on imports, taxing imports, he says there's a good chance that there will not be much money to go around, enough money to go around to run the government. So he says these people who are arguing with us are talking from their imagination. It sounds like they have gone crazy. They have not looked at the lessons of the past, and they're constantly bombarding you, writing you with articles that are half-truth. They don't show you both sides of the story. So that's what he's going to be talking about here. Okay, I'll go to the next paragraph. The objects of geometrical inquiry are so entirely abstracted from those pursuits which stir up and put in motion the unruly passions of the human heart that mankind, without difficulty, adopt not only the more simple theorems of the science, but even those abstruse paradoxes which, however they may appear susceptible of demonstration, are at variance with the natural conception which the mind, without the aid of philosophy, would be led to entertain upon the subject. The infinite divisibility of matter, or in other words, the infinite divisibility of a finite thing, extending even to the minutest atom, is a point agreed among geometricians, though not less incomprehensible to common sense than any of those mysteries in religion against which the batteries of infidelity have been so industriously leveled. So again, he's talking about all the accusations that the other side, the anti-federalists, are bringing against them. And he says it's easy, just use your common sense. And some of the arguments we have put forward in this Constitution, some of the authority that we want to give to the government are common sense stuff. Now, the books I showed you in Federalist 30 Part 1 are, some of them are easier to read than others, but I recommend that if you find enough time and interest, and if studying American history in a good way, in a deep way, studying the American Constitution in a deep way, calls you and interests you, when you read the Federalist Papers, make sure you look at those books too and read them. They bring up things that will help you understand these papers better. Like, for example, David Hume, the philosopher, how some of his thoughts influenced the founders, Madison, Hamilton, directly or indirectly. For example, here, remember that the beginning, that first line where he says, in disquisitions of every kind, there are certain primary truths or first principles. Like in those books, you can read about these words that are used, these phrases. Some of them are directly and indirectly relevant to what people like John Locke, David Hume had said. Remember in the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson writes, we hold these truths to be self-evident. It's kind of echoes of what we read in this first sentence, primary truths, first principles. These are self-evident things. These are not things that you really need to explain it to anybody with a little bit of common sense. So in those books, you can kind of delve a little deeper, go a little deeper, and understand the intellectual background of some of these founders and their ideas. Like the word passion, he uses the passion here. It's the kind of passion that's based on greed, based on selfishness, which is not just interest. It's not good for the society in general. It's just good for the person, or maybe the group of persons that this person affiliates with. So whenever you hear the word passion here, and especially in the Federalists, it has that negative connotation, negative meaning, things that will be bad for the society. So keep that in mind, and we will continue in part 3 of Federalist 31. I'll start with the third paragraph.